Hello everyone, welcome to Module 5. This is the module on regulations and the policy landscape. The first video that we're in right now is Unit 5.1, where we speak about the EU water reuse regulation, and I'll give an overview about this. My name is Teresa Geidel. I'm a researcher at Fresh Thoughts Consulting. And in this video, we want to explore the policy landscape in the EU when it comes to water reuse. This essentially means looking at what kind of policies and regulation exist to manage water reuse. First of all, the learning objectives are that at the end of this module, hopefully you'll understand more about the EU policy framework on water reuse, and that you'll be able to recognize the importance of coherent implementation at the national and at the local level and how these speak to each other. So on water reuse in general, again, it is useful for agricultural irrigation purposes. So whenever there's no sufficient rain naturally to water agricultural areas, it's useful for industrial processes or for drinking water purposes. And water reuse can help secure a reliable supply, which also reduces the pressure on other water bodies such as groundwater and lakes. In the light of climate change effects, it addresses challenges of drought and water scarcity in Europe and thereby supports adaptation to climate change. And over the last few years, there have been a lot of different policy instruments and methods that were developed in Europe to standardize and facilitate water reuse, particularly for agricultural irrigation, but also for other uses in the future. And there are different projects, partially pilot projects, that are testing various water reuse technologies at the moment, including so-called water circular economy solutions, in short, WACEs. We call them WACEs. And these WACEs depend on how the existing policies work and whether the existing policies enable the WACEs, those solutions, or whether they rather provide barriers so that they're harder to implement or cannot be implemented easily. And to take a look at the main policies, to give an overview on the policies, we start with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, which exists since 1991, and it sets standards for EU member states as to how to treat wastewater. So the goal is to protect the environment from harmful effects of either untreated or inadequately treated urban wastewater. Then in 2000, the Water Reuse Regulation came in place, as well as the Water Framework Directive, very important because it's overarching. This directive also relates to water quality, but it focuses on achieving the good status for all European water, so both surface and groundwaters by 2027. In 2015, there's another action plan. It's called Closing the Loop, an EU action plan for the circular economy, which is important. In 2020, the minimum requirements for water reuse regulation were put in place. And now, in the beginning of this year, January 2025, there was a revision of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive from 1991. So that's also important to know. The fact that this was revised, means that from now on, since the beginning of January 2025, it requires more advanced treatment technology, especially to remove nutrients and micropollutants, where the industries are supposed to cover most of the costs in order to put these technologies in place. The changes also mean that it promotes energy neutral treatment plans and that there's stronger health monitoring across the entire process, including for water reuse and improved access to sanitation. Next, we take a closer look at water reuse regulation and what it includes. One thing is that it has harmonized minimum water quality requirements for the safe reuse of treated urban wastewater in agricultural irrigation. Furthermore, it harmonizes minimum monitoring requirements, and there are risk management provisions to assess and address potential additional health risks and possible environmental risks that are currently partially not foreseeable yet, but there's a kind of risk mapping in place to be able to react if there are these additional types of risks. It also sets requirements for permits, and there are provisions on transparency so that there's the provision of accessible information on every water reuse project. Some technical specifications also exist for key elements of risks, and there's a delegated regulation act. This enables responsible parties in a water reuse project to draw upon robust risk management plans and ensure that the water from the water reuse projects can be used safely. And the good thing about this delegated regulation is that it also supports the nations to implement them. Next, on the implementation on the country level, quickly. So for the water reuse regulation, because it's a regulation and not a directive, it actually directly applies into national law. So there's no need for a transposition step. However, in national law, the competent authority has to be selected to assign different responsibilities, things such as creating permit systems or organizing how the monitoring works, what kind of penalty systems are put in place, and similar things. Then to help on the member state national level, there are technical guidelines on risk management, quality standards, permitting, monitoring, and administrative requirements that are offered to the member states, especially by the Joint Research Center, JRC, to facilitate the implementation and also to make compliance easier. So if we think about what's in the present and what's in the future, we can say that the technological advancements that are currently in progress on the regulation, especially through the EU Water Reuse Regulation and the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive connected, are generally enabling water reuse. What is still needed, however, is a more coherent water reuse framework. This is both on the regulation side, so the requirements for the EU, as well as operationally when it comes to implementation more locally. And the final goal must be to enable implementation at the local goal with very clear standards and requirements that are realistic to implement. It's also important to plan this from the very beginning, because this way the public trust is increased, because it's more logical for people to follow why these steps are necessary. Overall, as this topic is relatively new, it's even more important to form a coherent framework from the beginning to create harmonized and fair logical implementation approaches across the different countries and sectors. And in the last few years, different regions and countries have already successfully worked on water reuse, so it's important not to ignore those approaches and rather build on these learnings. In the next video, we'll talk about the policy barriers that hamper water reuse regulation a bit more in depth. For now, thank you, and I encourage you in the meantime to also look at the section with the references if you want to learn more. Thank you.